coming tonight to see our show. We're going to get started soon here. So I want to welcome you to the 21st edition of Gather, ASU Care Storytelling Series, and I'm your guest host, Roxanne De La Rosa. And I am pursuing my degree in journalism, and I hope to graduate the upcoming year in spring of 2023. I am also an intern at the Arizona Republic, and I produce the Arizona Storytellers project. So if you ever want to come by and say hi, come by all means. And tonight the theme is ancestors. And after our stories, we're going to circle up and have a casual chat with our guests. Whether you're watching here tonight or from a device or anywhere else, we want your questions. So put your questions in the chat. And if you're watching on stream, and if you're here tonight and have a question, feel free to raise your hand during the Q&A section. And I'll be kicking off the show by sharing my own personal story of my family and my own inner journey. Thank you. So, as a little brown girl, I always felt conflicted with who I was in the world. My mother is a third-generation Mexican American, and my father is a Mexican immigrant. And I never understood or knew much about Mexican culture or heritage. It felt like a distant cousin from me. And I grew up in South Phoenix, in a neighborhood that was probably one of the least, it was, not probably, it was the least desirable, one of the least desirable areas in Phoenix. And it wasn't very safe. It was dangerous, actually, to live there. And even when I went to elementary school, I don't remember seeing any brown people or anyone that looked like me in positions of authority or power. I remember most people that looked like me were janitors or cafeteria workers, and not to take away from the work that they do because it's a contribution. But, you know, I think subconsciously, when you don't see your face reflected in different positions, you feel subconsciously maybe that's not possible for you. You feel I think I grew to feel shame for being brown, for being poor, for not coming from a nice area or having nice things or wearing nice clothes. And I couldn't ever verbalize this as a little girl, but the shame was there nonetheless. And as I grew older, I would hear stories about my grandmother's life from my father. She passed away in February of 2006. Her name was Maria Luisa Soto Granados. That is her mother's last name and her father's last name. That's why Hispanic people have long names, if you didn't know that. So, he would tell me about her life, and that by all means, from what he told me, it was not an easy life. She never learned to read or write, and neither did her parents. From a little girl, he told me her life, she was born in a little mud adobe home made out of sticks and without any flooring, and that they had to work the land that they lived on, and so did her parents. And from 8 years old, he said that my grandmother had to rise before the sun was up and work at the land all day. So she would come back home after working all night, and the sun had set and it was dark. And this was her life. This was her childhood. She didn't even have an actual birth certificate because, she was born at home. She wasn't born in a hospital. And we had to guess her birthday. Her birthday was in May, we think, and we think she was born in the 1920s, but we don't know for sure. And when my dad talks about my grandmother, he says, he tells me frequently, "Tu abuela no le tenía miedo a nada." Your grandmother wasn't afraid of anything. She was fearless. And he said this was because she had worked and been born under such difficult circumstances that it just built and created this indomitable spirit that carried her and gave her this strength to carry through in life. And I asked, my dad recently, because I go to school and I had a homework assignment and I made him help me with it. And I asked my dad, do you think that my grandmother, that Nana Alicia, that's what we called her, do you think that she had regrets, or do you think that she felt bad because of the life, or sad that it was because it was so difficult. And he said, without hesitation, he said, no, no, your grandmother, she was content. Your Nana was content because she had went from the mud adobe home, and she had married my grandfather, my father's father, and they had moved to northern Mexico, Baja California. She was born in Jalisco, Mexico, in southern Mexico, and she lived in a border town. They settled in a border town about 20 minutes away from the Yuma, Arizona border. It's about 20 minutes away. My dad's small town is called Ciudad Morelos. And they built a life. They had a home there, and it wasn't much because this was not a nice home. Like, I visited it when I was little, and I did not think that this like house was nice. Like, but it had indoor plumbing, and it had floors, and it had like the basic necessities that anyone would need. And my grandmother had even told my dad at some point, and he didn't even remember telling me this, that my grandmother said that she was rich compared to what she had, what she had been born into. And I learned, like, over, because as I grew older and became more educated, that like people of color have been denied basic things, like being able to apply for a loan and buy a home. And I learned that, people that when they were allowed to buy a home, they had to buy a home in areas like South Phoenix, like where I lived. And that is why, people of color have historically live in poverty for still till this day. And so recently, this past March, I took a trip to Mexico City, my first trip. And my dad's town was poor again. Like, when I would go over and visit, like, I love seeing my family, but my reference point for Mexico was seeing like poor, just poverty. My dad's the buildings in my dad's town were run down, and I saw mud adobe homes made out of sticks too. We had seen that, so I imagine that's how my grandma lived. And I just thought Mexico in my head was this poverty-stricken country that my dad had to leave so that he could have a better life. And that was the extent of like Mexico and going to Rocky Point. So like we land in like Mexico City this past March, me and Kathy, she's here tonight. And we don't know what to expect. Like, we're in the airport and everything's like, we get to the airport. It's not as nice as Sky Harbor, but there's no AC. But, it's nicer than my dad's town. So we were like, and I lost my luggage, but that's another story. But like, we get there finally, and we call an Uber to like take us to our hotel. And we're like driving, like it's busy. You can tell like there's so much traffic. The Uber driver's telling us there's traffic at every hour of the day here. It doesn't matter what day of the week, it's traffic. So like I get that. So we're like driving, and we're looking out, me and my sister, we're looking out of like the passenger window, and we see this majestic, like Mexican flag, because we're staying near the Zócalo, which is one of the most historic parts of Mexico City. And we see this Mexican flag just like billowing, and it's like the largest flag I've ever seen in my life. Like, I've never seen an American flag that large. I haven't. And so like we're like, whoa, we don't know what to expect. And then we're like getting dropped off near our hotel, and you can just see the history that is Mexico. Like, you can see the buildings or like architectural like pieces, works of art. Like, you can feel like, and there's like, the indigenous like heritage. You can see that in the Spanish heritage. Like, it's all over the city. Like, you can feel it as you're walking down the roads. You can see the vendors are like cooking around every corner. The music's playing. You can see the vendors are selling trinkets, and it's just like unlike it's not the Mexico I knew. It wasn't Rocky Point. And we had never, like, it's a magnificent country. And we've tried to pack in as many, things as we could do in the 5 days we were there. We went to Teotihuacan. We went to go see the ancient pyramids, and a historian was our tour guide. We took this tour, and she told us that the Aztecs, the indigenous people of that time, were the most advanced civilization. for building like weaponry and sewage systems and irrigation systems. And this is stuff that I'm like, my ancestors were like, they did this, the country where my grandma was born and my father. And I'm just like, like, you know, like blown away. Like I see this stuff on Channel 8, but this is like real life. And the next thing that we saw, like we tried to fit in as much as we could. We went to Xochimilco. One of my favorite things we did was we went to go see Frida Kahlo's house, the La Casa Azul, which is her home, the Blue House. It is also it's also a museum. It's a national like landmark, and we saw people from all over the world like buying tickets to like go see her home. So we were in line, and you know, I thought I knew a little bit about Frida Kahlo because I saw the Salma Hayek movie. I didn't know anything. So I walk in, you know, I knew she was in a bad accident because the movie showed it, like the rod going through her body, if you didn't know. And she had a lot of like injuries from it and suffered the rest of her life because of the accident was really terrible. But like when I got to see her house and her paintings, like you could see like her pain. She was like depicting the pain of like she was unable to bear children because of this accident. She was in a lot of physical pain. Like you could tell, you could see that in her paintings. And I was in awe. I was like, this is a Mexican woman? Like, I know, like, I'm thinking this because I'm still that little girl that, like, you know, that maybe feels shame for being brown. But I just couldn't, I couldn't believe it. And then one of the most, like, things that stuck in my head was seeing her wheelchair. Like, because I guess her leg was amputated a couple years before she passed. And she was painting, like she had her easel painting and her paint brushes and all of the paints that she used to create her artwork. And I just thought, this woman did everything she possibly could with the life that she was given. And the last painting that I saw, one of the last things that really just struck with me was a still life of like watermelons. It was one of her last paintings. And the watermelons are like cut in different places. It's a simple painting, but she painted the words "Viva la vida" inside of the painting. Viva la vida means long live life, and the painting is a tribute to life itself. And she died shortly after that. And after like experiencing Mexico and like taking this trip, I feel like it healed something inside of me that I needed. I needed to know where it came from. I needed to know, to understand who I am, to understand who I am in this world, and to not feel ashamed. And I've never been more proud to be Mexican, of my heritage and what my grandmother had to endure and what my father and my parents had to endure, because I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And I just want to live my life fearlessly like my grandmother, and I want to take risks like my father did to cross, you know, the border to get here. And I want to live my life like Frida's painting. Viva la vida. Thank you. So I'm the host, so I'm introducing. I feel awkward for standing up here, continuing, like I'm supposed to go sit down, but I'm gonna introduce our next teller is Dinah Dinshaw. Her name is spelled Diana, but it is pronounced Dinah, I promise you. She's my friend, and I've heard a whole story. Like we're in storytelling class together too. Dinah is a Pakistani American, and she's been living in Arizona for 13 years. In 2016, she stumbled upon storytelling and feels it has literally and figuratively given her a voice. She now teaches the art of storytelling at the Storytelling Institute at South Mountain Community College. She also produces The Third Doll, which I've volunteered to be on, which is an online storytelling series you can find on YouTube. And I want to welcome my dear friend, Dinah Dinshaw, everybody.
So ja Rajkumari, so ja Rajkumari, so ja मैं बलहारी, so ja Rajkumari, so ja. Go to sleep, princess, go to sleep. Go to sleep, my blessed one, go to sleep. Go to sleep, princess, go to sleep. This is a lullaby my grandfather would sing to all his grandchildren. Now, my grandfather, he not only sang to us, but he would also tell us stories. And I remember that when I was about 4 or 5, he would come over to our home, to our house, and he would sit in the sofa chair. And he had just given up smoking his pipe, so he would be sucking on his thumb or gnawing on his thumb. And my sister and my cousin and I would sit around him, and he would tell us stories. And even at that young age, we knew that he was just making up these stories as he was going along. So I recently called up my sister and my cousin, and I said, do you remember any of the stories that Grandpapa used to tell us? And they both said no. But what we all remember is that the central character of those stories would be his father-in-law, our great-grandfather. And the stories were all about how his father-in-law got into some kind of trouble, in some kind of scrape, and him and his sidekicks would always, with some kind of luck and some kind of turn of fate, would get out of this trouble. Now, there is one story that we all do remember very clearly, and that is the Kissa-e Sanjan, the story of Sanjan. And this is the story of how our ancestors came from Persia to India. And my ancestors were living in Persia. They were Zoroastrians, which is an ancient Persian religion. And they were living in Persia peacefully in a safe place until Persia was attacked by the neighboring Arabs. And once the new rulers came to Persia, the Zoroastrians were oppressed and persecuted. And after many, many years of persecution, there was a priest called Neryosang Dhaval. And this priest realized that if he wanted to continue practicing his religion, he would have to leave and go find a place where he and his people could be safe and live peacefully. So Neryosang Dhaval, the priest, had heard about this land far away called Hind, which is now modern-day India. And he had heard about this place from merchant ships. So he approached one of the captains of the merchant ship and asked if he and some of the people, some of his other people, my ancestors, could be stowaways on this ship. And the captain agreed. So after sailing for many, many nights and stormy nights, the ship finally left, having left the land of Persia, arrived and docked at the port of Sanjan, which, as I mentioned, is in modern-day India. And when they docked at the port of Sanjan, they were taken to the court of the king. They were taken to the palace. And Neryosang Dhaval, the priest, walks into the court of the king. And he's surrounded by these huge pillars and with silk curtains billowing in the wind. And he enters the court, and on the throne is sitting the king, Jadde Rana. And he is dressed in his majestic robe and a bejeweled turban. And Neryosang Dhaval, the priest, in his white robe, stands before the king. And he asks, and he says, we have traveled from far, and we've come looking for refuge to live peacefully in this new land. And the king says, I understand. I understand your plight, but I cannot give you and your people refuge because all the resources I have here are for my people, and I have nothing to spare for you. So the priest says, may I have a bowl of milk that is filled to the rim? And the king thinks that's a really strange request. But these people have come from so far, so let me just humor him. And he asks one of the servants to go bring a bowl of milk that is filled to the brim. And when the servant brings the bowl of milk and offers it to the priest reaches into his robe and takes out a little bit of sugar and he drops it into the milk. And the king smiles. And Nersang Dhaval, the priest, realizes that the king has understood that just like the sugar being dropped in the milk had not spilled, but had sweetened the milk. These people, my ancestors, would not be a burden, but sweeten the lives of all those who lived in this new land. But the king was a little concerned that the culture of these new people would influence his people. So he said to the priest, he said, "You are a wise one. And yes, I am impressed and I am convinced you can live here, but there are some conditions. Your people will have to give up their weapons. You must speak our language. You must dress the way we do. You must eat the way we do. And your wedding ceremonies will have to be performed after sunset." And there were some other conditions as well. So my ancestors paid the price of freedom with cultural annihilation. 1,300 years after this incident, I was born in Pakistan, in Karachi, Pakistan. And by that time, a lot had changed. The land where my ancestors had docked had now been divided into India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. My family and our community did not remember the language of our ancestors anymore. We dressed the way the people of Sanjan dressed. We ate those kinds of food. And we had also adopted some of our cultural ceremonies from our new land. But there's one thing that we did remember, and that is the Kissa-e Sanjan, the story of Sanjan, of how my ancestors had left their home to find a new home where they could live peacefully and safely. So when I experienced some personal trauma in my life, I realized that I would have to find the courage, like my ancestors had, and find a new home for myself, a home where I could be safe again. On January 3rd, 1993, I found myself standing in the big hall at the Logan International Airport. And it was white walls, no windows, and fluorescent light. And in the hall, there was a snaking line of weary and tired travelers, just like my ancestors had been. And as I stood in line waiting for my turn, I wondered maybe if it would have been a good idea to keep some sachet of sugar in my pocket, just in case the immigration officer denied me entrance. But when my turn came, the immigration officer just asked me a few questions, and then she said, "Welcome to America." So while she did not pose any conditions on me to come and live in my new country, I do hope that, like my ancestors, I bring sweetness into the lives of all the people I touch. Thank you.
You guys, I can guarantee you that Dinah brings sweetness into the lives. So Dinah helps me. As I told you, I'm the producer of Storytellers Project, and we have about 300 to 400 guests at every show. And she volunteers from her job at the end of the day, because it's in the middle of the week. The shows are on Wednesday nights. She comes after work every time, like the last 3 shows, to come help me and pass out brownies. So she is bringing sweetness to people's lives. I promise. I promise.
Thank
But
you, Roxanne.
but Dinah, I wanted to ask you why is that a story that you heard in your childhood, or is that like passed down to you, or do you learn that in school, or?
It was a story that was, as I said, just repeated every opportunity, whether it was from my grandfather in school, wherever it was. It was a story that, like I said, we forgot a lot, we gave up a lot, but one thing we held on to was this story.
Thank you, Dinah. Thank you. So next up, we're going to have an ancestor story from Abigail Brammer-Fouts. She moved to Arizona with her husband and 2 pups in 2018. She has a Bachelor of Arts in English from BYU, Hawaii, and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Utah. And she's been the Director of Compliance for the Jewish and Family Children's Service since April 2020 and has enjoyed supporting such an amazing organization, she says. She loves writing poetry and short fiction in her free time and has a deep love for musical performance, having performed in several concert choirs and bands. And Abigail says she uses storytelling as a way to explore her childhood as an adopted Black Mormon in an increasingly white space. And I want to give you Abigail Brammer-Fouts.
Ancestry is a tricky thing as an adopted person. I'm sure that I'm extremely helpful when I talk to my doctor and they ask me, what's your family history for medical purposes? And I go, your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea. But ancestry is something that I've grown to love and that I've grown to cherish and really explore the duality that I kind of exist in concerning that. Ancestry to me is something that is not only something I was born with, but I was brought into. Biologically, my family comes from the west coast of Africa, Ghana, Cameroon, Nigeria, the Ivory Coast, and of course those homelands were ravaged by slavery, by the slave trade. My ancestors survived passage only to suffer through slavery in the South, primarily in North and South Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia. Recently, I received a DNA test from my dad from Ancestry.com, and it has opened up a whole entire world of knowledge and history that I had no idea about, of course. And luckily, it's connected me to a lot of new family members, new to me, aunts, uncles, cousins of the sort. Recently, I had a new cousin, Jordan, reach out to me about a pretty solid lead on a biological dad, my biological dad. And the reason why it was such a solid lead that she thought she could bring to me is that she showed my picture to our aunt. And upon seeing the picture, the aunt goes, "Oh yeah, she has the Dixon nose." And I got so excited. I've never had a nose, you know. And so I rushed to the bathroom. My heart jumped, and I looked at my nose, and I was like, a nose, a Dixon nose. And that's something that, of course, has made me very excited about following these new leads that are coming to me and exploring more about my ancestry, about this ancestry that brought me this beautiful, rich, melanated skin, and as well as the Dixon nose. But while I lack specific stories about my biological ancestors, I know a ton about the ancestry that I was brought into when I was adopted as a 6-week-old baby. I was adopted through and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church, and through LDS Family Services specifically. And when I was adopted into that, I became a part of the Brammers and the Whitesels. The Brammers, my dad's family, our lineage is traced back to 19th century Prussia, which is, I mean, just as like an aside, it was Prussia, right? Like, when I saw that, I was like, it's not Germany, it's not Russia, but it's Prussia. And we all know that Prussia was dissolved. There's no longer a Prussia. It just blew my mind. So we are from 19th century Prussia, which now is Hamburg and Bremen. And my mom's family, the Weitzel's, are primarily from Denmark and England and the Netherlands, and I'll talk about them. Soon. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, you are taught that family history is extremely important. Family history work is an extremely gigantic tenet in the faith. The LDS Church defines family history work as discovering your ancestors, researching that information, and preserving their stories. My grandma and grandpa Weitzel and my uncle Doug are incredible with family history. They've been working on our family history since I can remember. In fact, I always felt very blessed whenever family history work was a Sunday school lesson, and I knew that I would like to say the work's already done for me. There's really nothing more for me to do. Because between my grandma and grandpa and my uncle Doug, they traced our lineage like very thoroughly back to the 1600s, which even by Mormon standards is very impressive. And they would take a lot of trips, especially to Salt Lake City, where the church history library is, and they would pore through old documents and records and pictures, and they would then pass on the information to us. And it's something that I've always treasured. I grew up primarily in London and New York due to my dad's jobs, which is incredibly far from where my grandparents live, which is Enterprise, Oregon. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's a very podunk little town, and I loved it. Our visits to Enterprise, of course, were few, given that we lived very far away, but they were always extremely memorable. Whenever we would go to visit, my grandma Weitzel would always make like fresh brown bread with butter. I love brown bread, like wheat, anything. It's so good, so dense and delicious. But she would make that because it harkened back to her own grandmother's kitchen, my great-great-grandma Asenberg. And my grandma loved her grandma. I talked to her the other day, and she was just weeping because she misses her grandma so much, and she was such a big influence in her life. But my grandma would make us this food, and my grandparents always took very special care to kind of bring in treasures from years gone by, whether they acquired it from their own family members or they got it while they were out on family history trips to England or Denmark or things like that. And my grandparents also took very particular pride, they still do take very particular pride in decorating their homes in the style of kind of like an old English cottage. They loved it, and they love it. And it's primarily because it invoked the love and admiration that they had for the English part of their ancestry, their grandparents and great-grandparents, who, if they weren't from Russia or Prussia or Denmark, they were from the English countryside, Staffordshire, Birmingham, Warwickshire, and of the sort. And recently, I just bought a house with my husband, and I'm in charge of decorating it. And I have been just like weirdly hell-bent on finding a very particular type of painting to put in the house. And I've been scouring thrift stores and all of that. And it's a very niche thing that when I told my dad, he laughed and he said, "Oh, you want that because your grandma had it all over her place." It's a 19th century equestrian English painting. It's like, I'll just have to buy it. I won't be able to find it in a thrift store. I'll just have to pay for it. But it was just one of those examples where, it became clear to me that sometimes heritage isn't inherited. It's seen and it's experienced and it's placed upon you in that type of way. And so with the way that my grandparents were just so involved in kind of memorializing our family history, in 1998, my grandparents sent all of their grandkids booklets of their histories, from birth until 1998 at that time. And they had just gotten a computer, so they were like super excited to like type things out and to send them out. And so they sent this booklet to all of us, and it had all of their stories, but then all of the stories of their families and their grandparents that they loved to learn about. And one of my favorite people to learn about in that book was my great-grandma, Catherine, my grandma's mother. My great-grandma, Catherine, was described as 5 foot tall, blonde, blue-eyed, fiercely independent, very funny, very witty, and extremely and incredibly resilient through difficulties. And my youngest sister, Emma, Catherine, my great-grandma Catherine, is her namesake. Emma's full name is Emma Catherine, after my great-grandma Catherine. And even though we didn't know it when she was named in 2000, when she was born, Emma has become my great-grandma Catherine. These are words I've used to describe Emma on multiple occasions. Or, Emma is 5 foot tall, blonde, blue-eyed, fiercely independent, very funny. She's very witty, so intelligent. And it's just one of those things that as we look back on, again, it's history that seemed to be imbued upon us rather than inherited. And one fact that I loved learning about my great-grandma Catherine is that she gave birth to 4 sets of living twins. Yeah. She gave birth to 4 sets of living twins. And she had the first 3 sets between 1926 and 1929. So 3 sets of twins under the age of 3. Yeah. And my grandma and her twin Mary came much later in 1938. Still a lot of kids, like, no doubt. But, the hard part was over because the 3 sets of twins were out of diapers by the time grandma came around. And my grandma told me that her dad, so my great-grandpa Oliver, was responsible for cleaning all of the diapers when he came home every day from work. And so he would just like take all this huge like bag of soiled diapers from the 3 sets of twins and put them all on the lawn, and he would hose them down every single night. And he would joke with his neighbors that that's the reason why he had like the greenest lawn in the neighborhood, was all of this natural fertilizer. And there are 2 things, I was talking to my grandma about this event and, about the stories, and there are 2 things that she wanted me to point out. One, that she was the oldest by about 45 minutes. And like, how terrible, right? Because I feel like I hear about twins and they're the oldest by like 2 minutes or like maybe 10, but 45 minutes, it's insane. So my grandma's the oldest by 45 minutes. And 2, that she and Mary, her twin, are the last set of twins that we have in our family. And that includes all of her brothers and sisters. And so just with my grandma and grandpa, they had 4 kids. So there are 4 kids, 21 grandchildren, 27 great-grandchildren, and there is not 1 set of twins. And I don't know, but I feel like it will be me. I know it in my bones, and I'm so sorry, Justin, but I feel like I'm going to have that set of twins that's going to break this like century-long drought of multiples in our family. And so, of course, there's that ancestry that, I've inherited. And even though I've left Mormonism in my oldest years, there's a tradition that I love that really, I believe, ties me to my ancestors. So a child in the Mormon church can either be born into the covenant or they can be sealed. And being sealed to your family means that you're sealed to them for time and all eternity. It's a sacred rite, and it takes place in the temple. And I'm sure that you've seen the temples all around. They're white. They look like castles. There's one in Gilbert. And within the temple, there's this room called the Celestial Room. And it's supposed to, Mormons believe that these temples are kind of bastions of heaven on earth, and representative of what heaven will be like, especially the celestial room, the most sacred place. And it's a place where ancestors can sit right beside you, and they believe that the veil is very, very thin there, and that ancestors sit with you rather than look down upon you. And so in the celestial room, it's beautiful. It is lined in white, or it's just draped in white, white floors, white everything. And it's lined in gold. But most importantly, the walls are covered in mirrors. So you walk in and it's completely mirrored, and it's supposed to represent what eternity will look like with the people you love. It's infinite in all different directions. And that's where the sealings take place. So because I was adopted, I was sealed to my parents when I was about 1. I was sealed to my parents and my sister Alex, and of course, everyone that came before them and everyone that will come after. And of course, I don't remember my sealing, but my parents love telling me about my sealing because they think that my grand entrance was incredibly funny. So the sealing, like I said, takes place in the celestial room. It's quiet, it's reverent. My parents are in the middle with an altar, like a cushioned white altar, waiting for me. And my aunts and uncles and grandparents from both sides are all lining the walls, waiting patiently, silently. And they turn to watch me be brought in to be sealed to them. And they see me being carried by not one, but 2 little old ladies, because I was a 30-pound 1-year-old. They couldn't carry me. One couldn't carry me on my own, so she called in the other little old lady, and they were both kind of, balancing me. This like 30-pound 1-year-old draped in like white lace to this center altar to my parents. So, my mom, they hoist me to my mom, and the sealing takes place. And upon being sealed, I'm sealed to my family, and their ancestors became my ancestors. And at that time, my ancestry is almost like doubled upon. It's kind of thrust into this duality that not until recently I feel like I haven't really had to grapple with. And so it was nice writing this story to kind of explain that. And like I said at the top, ancestry is a tricky thing as an adopted person, but it's something that I've learned over my 30 years that it is not purely based in biological relations. Ancestry and family history can be sealed. It can be adopted. It isn't only predicated upon DNA, but it can be based on family traditions, family lore, spoken history. And whether through blood or through sealing, I know that I am all of my ancestors' wildest dreams. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail, for sharing your story with us tonight. I have members in my family that are Mormon as well, and I've heard about like that they hold a lot of records of what you were talking about, like your family. Can you share a little bit about like to explain that, because I don't even remember off the top of my head, but I know that they hold a lot of like history from like families that have been part of the church, and I guess it's easy to find records. You can explain. Maybe,
yeah. So it's like very easy to find records with the church. In fact, Ancestry.com is linked with the church. And so they're able to find so much because it's a very big joint effort. People will either send in documents or find documents and send them into the church, and it's all contained. It's all a big, pretty impressive collection. I used to work at the church history library, and I think the floors beneath the basement, there are like 11 or 10 or 11. It's just very expansive. But it's also something that you can see if you go to Salt Lake. You can go into the family history library and you can search your ancestors. I've done it a lot of times with my family and with my husband's family, and is just impressive. And it's something that I'm glad that there is something like the Family History Library or even Ancestry.com, and it's really made it very apparent to me that I have to start myself recording and keeping documents and, passing those on to my kids. So, yeah.
So next up is Dr. Mathew Sandoval. And Dr. Mathew Sandoval is a senior lecturer at Barrett, the Honors College at ASU's downtown Phoenix campus, where I go to school. Dr. Sandoval is currently researching the transborder holiday, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, and he's examining the ways the holiday has developed from ancient Mesoamerican ritual to American popular culture. And he's traveled all over the world. He didn't want me to name all the places he's traveled. He's traveled all over the world and performed in theaters. He holds a PhD in culture and performance arts and performance from UCLA. And I want to take it away, Mathew.
I'm going to adjust this. You can take a breath. You're good. You're good. This may take a while. As a professor, I'm tech dumb. How you guys feeling? You guys feel good? Yeah? Anybody get anything to drink out there? Cool. Good. Spend some money here? I'm going to go just a little bit higher. I think that's good. Thank you. My 9-year-old niece and I are kneeling on the floor of my bathroom. I've just moved into a new apartment, and the previous tenant didn't bother to clean the place before they moved out. So her and I are going to give the place a deep clean, starting with the bathroom. Now, it's not really my idea to bring my 9-year-old niece with me on this expedition, but once she got word that Uncle Matty needed help, she chimed in real quick. Uncle Matty, you need help? I can help you. I can help you if you pay me. This little 9-year-old hustler. But I love it, though, because she's actually at that age where she's learning the value of a dollar. She's learning how to earn and save money. Because I'm a good uncle, I say, yeah, you can help me. Absolutely. It'll be like probably 2 hours of work, and I could pay you $25 an hour. How much is that? Psh, $50. I know how to multiply, Uncle Matty. Duh. Wait, you'll pay me $50? So we're on the floor of my bathroom, kneeling, looking into the toilet as neon blue Clorox bleach gel streams down the bowl. She's holding the toilet brush firmly in her hand, but she's got a very unsure look on her face. Uncle Matty, can you tell me what to do? I've never actually done this before. I'm about to teach my 9-year-old niece how to clean a toilet. I'm about to teach her how to clean the filth of others. I'm immediately transported back to the summer of 1995. I'm 16 years old, and I'm working my first real job as a housekeeper, but not at like a respectable establishment at all. No, this is like a cheap second grade, 1-star, like corporate tenement that you might know as Motel 6. We'll leave the light on for you. I'm the only dude on the housekeeping staff, and at 16, I'm also the youngest. I spend my days pushing this really ancient vacuum across carpets that are hardened with dirt. I spend my days picking up cigarette butts, snotty tissues, chicken bones, pizza crust, soda cans, bubble gum, nudie mags, needles, drug residue, half-used condoms, fully used condoms, a whole lot of filth. I spend a lot of my time cleaning bed sheets that have been stained with all of the body fluids. Towels that have been stained with all of the body fluids. It's not good. I'm spending my teenage glory years on my knees picking hair out of shower drains and cleaning toilets that are absolutely filthy. The worst part, though, is the smell. Because I work with so many low-grade detergents, it starts to really saturate my skin, and it doesn't matter how much cheap knockoff cool water cologne or fake Calvin Klein cologne I spray on my body, I reek of industrial chemicals all the time. Needless to say, I did not have a girlfriend in high school. I don't like working at Motel 6, but I do it for 2 years. And I do it on days when I don't want to do it. Like the day that I broke my hand and fractured it from the knuckle bone all the way down to my wrist, and then continued to finish the 8-hour workday in absolute agony, and then go to the hospital, got it cast, and showed up to work the next day. This wasn't noble work, but it was work that had to be done, so I made sure to do it well. Cleaning the filth of others is something that I did because I wanted to earn and save money to go to college, but I also did it because I wanted to honor my ancestors. See, I got the job really because of my grandma. My grandma Molly, she was a legendary Motel 6 housekeeper. If such a thing exists, she was definitely that. When I applied for the job at Motel 6, I told them that I was Molly's grandson. They hired me on the spot. Now, my grandma Molly, she had spent her entire life cleaning the filth of others. Her first job was working as a housemaid for the manager of the Kennecott Copper Company. See, she lived in a small mining colony in the mountains of Nevada. This was a racially segregated village where the white folks lived at the top of the mountain and my grandma lived at the bottom in the ethnic barrio with other Mexicans, Chinese, and Greeks. My grandma Molly spent her mornings and her late nights raising 8 kids in a 2-bedroom house, and then spent the rest of the day taking care of the mine manager's 2 kids and cleaning his 8-bedroom house. She spent the day mopping his floors, sweeping his floors, cleaning his toilets, while he would send the men of the village to extract copper out of the mountains, smelt it in hazardous chemicals, and then take the toxic waste and dump it into the ethnic barrio where she lived, so that no matter how much she cleaned the filth of others, her own neighborhood would never be sanitary. When the mine closed, my grandma Molly took a job as a housekeeper at the Motel 6. She very quickly established herself as one of the most dedicated employees that they had on staff. She never took a sick day, like literally never took a sick day. And it wasn't because she had some robust immune system. It was because she literally couldn't afford to take time off from work. If she didn't clock in, she didn't get paid. If she didn't get paid, her kids didn't eat. It was simple. It wasn't noble work, but it was work that had to be done, so my grandma Molly made sure to do it well. On December 3rd, 1990, my grandma Molly clocked out of work at Motel 6. She drove the 20 minutes back home, took her shoes off as she came through the door, took off the little hat that she always wore, and sat on her recliner chair just to take a little rest before she made dinner for herself. She never woke up. She may have been a minimum wage worker, but you better believe she earned her rest. My grandma Molly didn't pioneer cleaning the filth of others. It's actually something that she inherited from her grandmother, a woman by the name of Isabel Trujillo, except Isabel Trujillo actually wasn't her real name, and to this day, my family doesn't even know her real name, because Isabel was born Navajo, raised in a Navajo clan, raised on Navajo land. But in the 1860s, the US military used lethal force to remove Navajo people from their ancestral territories so that white entrepreneurs could move in and begin extracting copper from the mountains. The US government rounded up thousands of Navajo families and then led them on a long, forced march, nearly 500 miles long, from eastern Arizona to eastern New Mexico to a patch of desert that they called Bosque Redondo. They penned those Navajo people in, creating the first concentration camp in US history. This forced relocation is what we call the Long Walk. On that long walk, young Navajo girls were kidnapped during raids and then sold as slaves all over the American Southwest. This is what historians call America's other slavery. Young Navajo girls and other young Native American women were sold as slaves and did slave labor in order to support the agricultural economies of New Mexico and Arizona. Isabel was one of them. Until Native American slavery was officially abolished in the 1890s, Isabel worked as a house slave. She spent her entire life back bent, sweeping, mopping, cleaning dishes, cleaning beds, cleaning towels, cleaning toilets. It wasn't noble work. It shouldn't have even been legal work. But I suppose it was work that had to be done. So Isabel made sure to do it well. I tell my 9-year-old niece, okay, the first thing that you do is you dip the brush into the water. And then you start working underneath the rim. There you go, that looks good. Okay, you gotta get hard, scrub hard underneath the rim. That's where all the like grime and gunk and you gotta get it. Nice, good job. Okay, now the bowl. Use the brush, you just kind of just work the bowl. You go all the way around, but you gotta get all the angles. There you go, babe, that looks good. That looks good. Okay, now the toilet hole. Use the tip of the brush, you kind of like swish in there. You swish and circle and swish. You got it. Hey, that looks good. Babe, good job. That's really good. Hey, high five. All right. Now, you got to repeat that whole process and do the whole thing all over again. Uncle Matty, I got to do it all again? I tell her, yeah, babe. You got to do it again. Because if it's going to be done, you got to make sure to do it well. You know what I mean? As she shakes her head yes, I could see in her eyes that in fact she does know what I mean. And in this moment, I am a very, very proud uncle. We inherit from our ancestors so much more than their genetic code. If we're lucky, we inherit their values, their principles, their work ethic, their resilience. My grandmas Isabel and Molly are long, long gone. But as I watch my 9-year-old niece clean a toilet for the first time, I can't help but feel like they are somehow still here. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I'm trying to like compose myself, and I'm sure quite a few other people in the room are doing so as well. I just wanted to how old were you when your grandmother Molly passed away?
I was in middle school. I actually remember the day so clearly. My mom found out very early, and she came and got my brother out of school to let us know. My grandma Molly meant a lot to the family. She really was the linchpin. She was a hard woman. I mean, she was a good worker, but gosh, she was a hard woman that everybody loved. It was a big loss, but I remember where I was. I remember a lot of details of that day, all of which got left out of the story because some things are really, really difficult to tell in public.
I had another question too. What made you stay? I know you talked about like the motel, getting the job at the Motel 6, but what made you stay there for 2 years? Because you could have worked at like McDonald's or like Jack in the Box. Like, why did you put yourself through that? I guess, and you explained that, but like, really tell us.
No, it's so funny because like there was a bit of shame because like working at Motel 6 when you're in high school is like not cool. Smelling like chemicals all day is like not cool. And my other friends had cool jobs where cool jobs meant like working at McDonald's. It meant working at the grocery store bagging groceries. I didn't have that cool job, but it really was my grandma. It was like, this woman did this for so many decades. I could tough it out through high school like I owe it. I owe it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you. Give me a round of applause. So we're going to get ready. To have our Q&A portion. And now that we've heard, these very different stories, we're going to welcome all of the tellers back up. And if you're watching at home, put your questions in the chat and raise your hand. Feel free to raise your hand if any of you here tonight have a question for any of our tellers. But I'm going to start off with 2 questions, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. So just let us know if you have a question for one of the tellers, and for you guys at home or watching anywhere, please, type them in the chat. So I want to ask, whoever feels comfortable answering this, this was a great theme tonight, and it was good insight into some of your histories and heritages. Did you know exactly which story you had to share upon learning that the theme was ancestors tonight? And feel free to, whoever would like to answer first.
Go ahead. No, Abigail.
Okay. No. I didn't know the story that I was going to tell, like, at all. No. But I'm glad with the story that I ended up with.
I definitely didn't. I actually, when I talked to the folks here at the Care Cultural Center with Gather, I had a whole other story planned. But this episode with my niece just happened a couple weeks ago, and I've been trying to process it. And I was like, I'm just going to use this as the opportunity to kind of process it. So this is a late in the game change for me. I was like, oh, I'll test it out. Maybe they'll like it. Maybe they won't. We'll see.
It seems like it's a unanimous no. I knew as soon as I got the email from Stacy and the theme, I knew that I wanted to incorporate the lullaby that my grandfather used to sing for us, but I did not know what would follow.
And for myself, I've told stories. I attend the Storytelling Institute at South Mountain. If you guys ever want to learn storytelling, they offer courses. Liz Warren is a director, if you don't know about it. And they teach that you can learn how to craft personal stories, folk tales, and you can weave them, weave your personal experience into the things that you read or the stories that mean something to you. And for me, why I had these were separate stories, and I kind of layered them, and then I layered my most recent trip to Mexico City, as you heard about in March, and that was just something that I feel like I hadn't told that part before, and I just kind of put in all together some of the pieces of other stories that I've shared while in class with Dinah's heard some of them, and then just this being able to express what I learned from taking this amazing trip that I took this year. So Another question so I want to ask all of you, and I'm going to answer at the end too, but what's one way your views and understanding about a particular ancestor have changed as you've matured and had more life experiences?
I'll start. How have they changed? The one that I kind of keep that keeps like coming to my mind, and I know it's strange because it's ancestors, but I feel like learning more about my ancestors, and especially my great grandma Catherine and my grandma, has helped me understand my own mom a lot more than I thought it would. I feel like you have your parents and they're so contemporaneous with you while you're growing up that you don't see a lot of how maybe their parents were before, and then how it translates to you. So for instance, my mom hates reading. She hates it. I love reading. And I always thought it was really weird how much she hated reading. But then I found out that my grandma used to use it as a punishment. She used to use reading as a punishment because my great grandpa, her dad, didn't like realize that my grandma couldn't read. And so it was always just a really terrible experience that he would keep hammering on her to read. And she hated it. And she actually didn't read. She told me she didn't read her first novel for like fun until she had her last kid. And so it just made a lot of things clearer for me with my own mom. And I think I really needed that.
Thank you. Would you like me to ask the question again, or?
What did you learn about your ancestors?
So it's I'm going to repeat the question that way. What's one way your views and understanding about a particular ancestor have changed as you've matured and had more life experiences?
I'm actually going to piggyback right off you, Abigail. And like Abigail said, you don't think, I don't think of my mother as my ancestor. When you think ancestors, you're thinking, great-grandparents and grandparents and like that. But I would say the same, it's my mother. When growing up, my mom was really strict. My friends used to call her MSN. Mom said no, because she would say no to everything. But as an adult, I see her in a completely different way. The difficult life she had, what values, like you said, Matt, what values she instilled in my sister and me, and understand why she was doing what she was doing. So yeah, definitely my mom.
Yeah, I would say, so my research and scholarship, what I write about and study as a professor is Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, which some of you probably know this holiday about honoring the people who have passed, but it's also really deeply about honoring your ancestors. And as part of doing that work, I'm always thinking of my ancestors. It's just like always there. And it's only recently, especially because I don't have kids, I only got my nieces and nephew, but they have helped shape for me the idea that I need to start being very mindful and intentional about how I am, because I am an ancestor in training. I am going to become an ancestor, and I need to be instilling certain things so that I can be a serviceable ancestor for them.
Thank you. For me, I guess what I realized while like forming and crafting this story is that is to like be grateful for like the things that my parents had to go through, and be grateful for my own life, like that I didn't have to endure, working in a field all day like my grandmother. It's so close and so far away at the same time. And I think it's really, really important to know where you come from, to go visit the places where you're, even if you don't know your family. Look how important it was for, Abigail to look up her ancestry. Like, it's so important, because I think like society gives us these notions or these ideas, especially, particularly for people of color, to feel less than or not enough. And you need to know that that's not true, that you need to know where you come from. Are we having a mic pass around, or?
Yeah. If anyone has questions, they can raise their hand. I do have an online question, but you can take that one first.
Okay.
Okay, the question I'd like to ask is, what would your ancestors think of our society and our culture nowadays?
I guess, as I mentioned in my story, that my ancestors they paid the price of freedom with cultural annihilation. And I have experienced that. And again, as I mentioned, historically, they came to a land which is now modern day India. And then they moved, and I grew up, and my grandfather, my parents, they were in Pakistan. And we took on the culture of that land. And then I moved here. And not only me, but my friends have moved here, my family has moved here, other cousins. And we have taken on Christmas and Thanksgiving and culture of here. So I guess to answer your question is what my ancestors would think about our society now is they would be like, assimilate and do the best you can and contribute and keep adding sweetness to the lives of the people you touch.
And brownies. We're going to take the question that we have for the online chat.
Kit says, I loved this. Have all of these people been storytellers for a long time? It seems so.
That's very nice. I have not been. In fact, my family has a joke about how I tell stories. It's terrible, and I can't believe I'm up here right now. But they go, oh, yeah, well, I was walking down the street, and I saw this dog. But, let me tell you about this dog. It's a German Shepherd. But have you learned about it? It's tangential. So really, I've really tried to hone in on the storytelling. I think the first story that I told was in 2019. It was with Arizona Storytellers. And it was actually the week of the pandemic where people were like, what's going on? Should I do I stay home? And it was that Tuesday. And then everything shut down. So that was the last, or not the last time, but that's when I kind of started participating in these kinds of events.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a minute. I started in the late 90s when I was in college. I started in the spoken word scene of Las Vegas, which, believe it or not, did have a spoken word scene. It wasn't just gambling. So I started there and then did theater for a long time before I got into starting to actually perform my own work as opposed to the work of others, which I've always found really rewarding. And I was saying earlier that as a professor, it's such rigid work. It's hard work and rigid work, but I need an outlet, a creative outlet to still be able to express things. And this has always been a venue for that.
Thank you so much for all of your stories. It was really amazing and interesting stories. And my question is, I have my mother lived well into her 90s. Both of my grandmothers lived well into their 90s. My great-grandmother lived to be 101. And yet, now my parents are gone, my grandparents are gone, and I have a very large family, and we're thinking about how do we keep these memories going? It's really important that the kind of stories that you tell, and how do we actually get that into more of our culture of telling stories from all the very different places that we all have come, because once and I'm going to tell this to all the young people that are here, once your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents are gone, if you haven't talked to them about things, you're not going to be able to do it. So thank you for doing that. And it's just a question, how do we get more of that going on?
I think you have to share stories, and you have to talk, because I feel like, we don't ask questions. My grandmother, I was pretty young when my grandmother died. I was a young adult, but I didn't have the time, nor the maturity to ask her, about her life. So maybe just asking, people questions about, about what type of work they did, or like, I feel like a lot of times, like, we don't ask, like, just little things that could tell us so much. And if you could, like, just start conversations, with some of the, like, oldest people in your family, because they're still here, you can learn, like, things that you never knew. I'm still learning things that I never knew when I asked my dad, recently, if he thought my grandmother felt regret or, like, sadness over her life. And that's very recent that I learned that. So asking questions and sharing stories.
I have a comment from a viewer. They said the StoryCorps app. You can ask family for their stories, and in the app you can record it, and then I guess NPR has a platform where you can share those stories, and you can go listen to a bunch of those stories, apparently.
It's really cool. They did StoryCorps when I was in 6th grade. They started it, and they had a little booth in Grand Central Station. And me and my friend Lily went down and we did it. And I mean, it's ridiculous once you listen to it. It's just, 12-year-old rambling. And we actually did a 20-year catch up a couple of months ago. And it was, they save it. They save all of it. So I completely endorse StoryCorps.
I would say that continue to have, so events like this, there are many events, storytelling events around town, but even with your family, when you get together, instead of watching a movie or instead of, sit and have stories, tell stories. And even if it's just about, do you remember the time we went and did this? Or, and as Roxanne said, when you get together, make sure to include the younger people and then tell stories about how, how your grandparents met or how they traveled. Because you're right, once the ancestors are gone, stories do go away with them.
We have one more question up here.
Hi, my name is Sheree. I have a question, a comment. Hi, Roxanne. So I really appreciate, Abigail, you sharing just a little bit of that history and background about there being these archives that you could go and look up family history. I think that's phenomenal, and that's a great thing to be able to have, but I know not everyone has that. And then I really appreciate, Dinah, that you started your story with that beautiful, beautiful song that you sang so wonderful and well. But I noticed you sang that song in, of course, a different language, and just asking, are you using these specific nuances that are still from your culture that you're bringing in, whether they're songs or languages, so that you can kind of sprinkle in that sweetness? I think we all got a little piece of these different pieces of each of your ancestors that you shared tonight, and hearing more of those songs and those languages I think are really helpful. How are you guys continuing to do that in different ways so you guys can share a little bit of pieces that you got from your ancestors kind of into the greater culture that we're all sitting in and enjoying in this room now? Thank you.
I guess, Sheree, just like this, coming to venues, telling stories, and I've been telling stories for a while now. I take classes with Roxanne, and I will tell a story to anybody who will ask me to tell them a story.
I struggled, like, I told a story about this. Dinah's heard it. I struggled with, like, speaking Spanish, so I, like, try to challenge myself to, to speak Spanish as much as I can. It was something that was a big deal to me. So, like, when I'm sharing stories, I'm digging deep to, like, get vulnerable. And sometimes it's, I don't know if you guys feel like this, but sometimes it's like a process. Like, it's kind of like, it's even a little painful. Like, I don't want to discourage anybody from, like, storytelling, but it's a process of, like, having to, like, dig deep and, and express, like, give, feelings, words, and thoughts that, like, maybe I don't always, like, deal with, like, consciously on on an everyday basis. So for me, I guess just trying to challenge myself to, like, I'm trying to speak Spanish when needed, when I'm referring to my family, and I feel like that, I don't know, roots me in my story. Tell stories. If you guys ask questions, to ask the simple like, it doesn't even have like it doesn't have to be a deep question. You can ask like anything, and like have a conversation, and you'll be surprised. Like, people will open up to you. Your family members will probably open up to you in a way you've never ever seen before. And even like the process of crafting a story, it's allowed myself to, like, for healing and to open up in a way that I cannot do in everyday conversation. So,
And I would just add to that sometimes storytelling can be a bit intimidating. I feel like sometimes you think you have to be extremely profound, or just bestow a lot of knowledge. One of my, like, favorite storytellers, I know this will be surprising to him, but I think my father-in-law, Dan, is one of the best storytellers, and it's because he's constantly offering stories. And I mean, sometimes they're long, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you've definitely, like, heard them over and over again. But the way that he tells stories ensures that they pass on. I feel like they're usually very funny, and it's just exciting to hear him tell a story over again. And so I would just say offer. You can always kind of add a little bit just into conversation. It doesn't have to be profound. It can be, what's that? I'm sure there's a story. I can't think of it off the top of my head that Dan likes to tell. But yeah, that's what I would recommend.
we'll have one more question. Does anyone have a question?
Abigail, you kind of answered what I was going to ask the other storytellers, of if there was somebody in your life who you could pinpoint was a really good storyteller that kind of inspired you to do that. Before you answer real quick, I want to comment on your story specifically, though. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, and one of the things free for anyone's FamilySearch.org. And I remember doing that as a youth and finding my great-grandmother and just seeing her name and seeing, like, how she wrote, like, the census records, and she wrote her name and everything. And this is, like, powerful connection to someone I had never met was so cool. And so, and there's a family history center in Mesa, actually, by the new Mesa Temple that they've just built. But I'm very interested to know if there's someone inspired you, or something, maybe an event in your life that made you want to start storytelling as well.
Yeah, I got two. I'm gonna give you two. I'm sorry. One is basically, I'm gonna give you this one because it's also a shout out. My mom converted to Mormonism actually a couple decades ago, and her research and ancestry, she's so devoted to it. Like, she wants to know everything about both sides of my lineage. She has been giving me all of these stories. Like, the stories that I told today are really, like, coming from my mom. She was just giving me information because she's so overwhelmed with joy when she learns about my ancestors. So my mom for sure, but also my uncles. like we grew up, we're mountain Mexicans. So we grew up like camping in the backwoods and forests and stuff like that. And like the campfire storytelling of my uncles was like next level. They would really like be able to like really spin a yarn in a way that you're just like, oh my God, tell me more, tell me more. And so I learned that. I think I learned intuitively from them the ability to like catch an audience and kind of keep them there. They somehow had that, and I was always enamored with it. So for me, it's that.
Oh, I guess I did kind of answer it. Dan is just great, and I was thinking about it more and just the intonations that he uses. And it's a bad impression, but he grew up in Montana, and Turner, Montana. It has like 60 people in it, and just the way that he talks is like, well, let me kind of start telling you this yarn, and I just love the way that he tells stories. And then the inspiration to start telling stories, I guess, is like I mentioned kind of at the end of my story, I haven't really, I feel like when you're living your life, you don't really see anything special, at least me, sometimes about it. And then I kind of started noticing as I was talking to people, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm adopted into an all-white family. Oh, how did that? Oh, I'm a Mormon. Oh, you're a Mormon. Oh, like I've traveled here, and it just kind of went on and on. And my dad, I have a whole stepdad now, and my dad's gay, and it's just, it's just a lot of stuff that whenever I kind of tell people, they're like, oh my gosh, if you wrote a book, I'd read it, and. I don't know. It kind of dawned on me that it's like, oh, maybe, yeah, this is kind of an interesting kind of cross section of things, and I should probably become more comfortable with telling stories. And I mean, maybe there is another, Black Mormon adoptee whose dads are gay, and who went to law school, who is also looking for an outlet into wanting to tell their stories. So I just think it's important to put yourself out there, because you don't know who will see you there, and might feel like it's okay to be seen as well.
As I said in my story, of course, my grandfather, and as I said in my story, he would just make up stories. But my mother, she used to tell us what we talk about at the Storytelling Institute. The genre is wisdom stories, and she would just tell us a wisdom story, and then just refer to it when she needed to kind of remind us of the lesson. So if the lesson was that you don't know something, that something bigger and better is there for you. So she had told us the story about this little girl and how she didn't have much experience, and what she asked for was in her realm, and was missing out on bigger things. So my mom would, so this little girl, she loved cabbage stew. And that's what she had asked her father for when he was traveling to an exotic land. So whenever we, as in my sister and I, we would be really upset because we didn't get what we wanted, because we were thinking in a very narrow way. She had already told us the story, so she would then just say, "Are you asking for cabbage stew?" And we knew right away what she was referring to. So she was a great storyteller in that way. I actually, as Abigail said, was going to write a book. I had some betrayal in my life, and that kind of pushed me into thinking I would like to write a book to kind of, like you said, somebody else can learn from it, how to heal through that. And I, at that time, stumbled across storytelling and said, oh, this was going to maybe help me write my book. And storytelling completely changed my life. And as I always say, it's given me a voice, literally and figuratively.
I guess for me, I always, when I was little, I liked to read a lot. I was like a book, voted like bookworm of whatever. And I like to write too. My major's in journalism, but my dad tells a lot of stories. He doesn't think he's a storyteller, but if you met him, you'd hear probably the same stories over and over again. And he loves like telling them. So I think it's been like passed down to me without like, my dad wouldn't say he was a storyteller, so subconsciously passed on. And it's given me a way an outlet to express myself in a way that I can't always do, you know? Like I think I said this earlier in everyday conversation, and just like crafting the story and, you know, digging deep within myself and learning to be vulnerable. Storytelling gives me, I don't know, it gives me things that I can't get anywhere else. So I want to thank you for being here tonight with us, with beautiful stories this month, and we appreciate you and all of our storytellers, Dinah, Abigail, Mathew, and I've enjoyed being your host, your guest host tonight. And I want to thank my nephew. He's sitting over there like he did not want to come. He's 12, but he came to support me. At least that's what my sister said. But gather us quarterly. We hope to see you at the next event. It'll be on Friday, January 20th. And we're going to have a new guest host, and we're going to have another additional 3 personal storytellers. The theme is going to be quitting time, and stick close to asucare.com for show information, tickets, and, you know, more information. And have a good night. Thank you.